The security guard's voice crackled through the earpiece at 2:47 a.m. "Boss, there's a woman at the service entrance. She has a kid with her. Says she needs to see you." Bang Ji-Yeong loosened his cufflinks, still thinking about the business meeting that had just ended. Los Angeles was supposed to be quieter than Seoul. "Tell her I'm closed," he said. "She says the boy is yours." Ji-Yeong's mind raced through every possibility, every woman, every night in the past 6 years. Nothing. He trusted no one, he remembered everyone, and he had never seen this woman before in his life. But something in his chest tightened, a feeling he hadn't felt for a very long time. The feeling that his past had just caught up with him. When Ji-Yeong reached the service entrance, the woman was soaked through. The boy beside her stared up at him with dark, unblinking eyes. "Daddy?" the child whispered. The woman's voice shook. "You don't remember me, but he's yours. I need you to keep him safe just for 3 days." Ji-Yeong opened his mouth to call security. Then he saw it. The boy's eyes. Dark, familiar, haunted in a way no 5-year-old should be. "If I don't come back," the woman said, pressing an envelope into his hands, "he needs to know the truth." Then she turned and disappeared into the rain. Ji-Yeong stood there, a man who had ruled Seoul's underground, now holding an envelope in the hand of a boy who might be his son. Willie looked up at him. "Mommy said you'd protect me." In 72 hours, a DNA test would reveal a truth that would shatter everything Ji-Yeong thought he knew about family and loyalty. But right now, in this moment, all he could do was order the test and wait. Before we begin, if you believe that family isn't always about blood, but about who chooses to stay, please sit with us for this story. And if at any point it touches a memory of regret or a second chance you never expected, let me know in the comments. I read and reply everyone. This channel is for those who know that it's never too late to choose love. Now, let's continue.
The heavy brass doors of the Lotus Room clicked shut, cutting off the roar of the Los Angeles rain. Inside, the club was a tomb of marble and shadows, but for the first time in a decade, Bang Ji-Yeong felt like a trespasser in his own empire. He looked down. The boy, Willie, hadn't moved. He stood in the center of the foyer, a small, shivering island of damp cotton and fur. The stuffed tiger he clutched was sodden, smelling of cheap detergent and a mother's frantic hugs. It was a scent that didn't belong in a place built on the smell of expensive tobacco and cold ambition. "Upstairs," Ji-Yeong commanded. His voice, usually a weapon of absolute authority, sounded thin to his own ears. The elevator ride to the penthouse was silent. Ji-Yeong watched the floor numbers climb, his mind dissecting the woman's words. "He's yours." It was a lie. He was certain of it. He remembered every face, every debt, and every night he had spent seeking warmth in this cold city. Tina Cross was a stranger. Yet, as they stepped into the vast, glass-walled living room, Willie walked straight to the grand piano in the corner. He didn't touch the keys. He just stared at the ivory with a look of profound, quiet recognition. 30 years, Ji-Yeong thought to himself, his chest tightening. 30 years since I watched a girl with the same eyes play a lullaby in our house in Seoul. 30 years since I last touched that piano. "Sit down," Ji-Yeong said, gesturing to the Italian leather sofa. Willie climbed up carefully, setting the stuffed tiger beside him, arranging it just so. Then he folded his hands in his lap. No fidgeting, no tears. Ji-Yeong turned away, unsettled by the quietness. He poured himself a drink and didn't touch it. Instead, he took out his phone and made a call to his private doctor. "I need a fast DNA test. I want no paperwork, no delays. I need the result within 72 hours. Mrs. Kang will send you the samples." He ended the call and stood there, glass untouched, staring out at the rain sliding down the windows like slow confessions. Behind him, a small voice broke the silence. "Am I in trouble?" Ji-Yeong turned. The boy was watching him closely now, not afraid, assessing. "No," Ji-Yeong said. "You're safe." The boy considered this, then nodded, as if filing the information away for later use. "My name is Willie Cross." Ji-Yeong inclined his head. "Willie," Ji-Yeong said. "All right. Open your mouth, Willie. This won't hurt. I just need to know if you're truly mine," Ji-Yeong calmly said to Willie. Willie nodded, then opened his mouth. The process was clinical. A sterile swab, a gentle pull of the boy's lower lip, and the scraping of his cheek. Willie didn't flinch. He didn't cry. "Are you going to send me back?" Willie whispered as Ji-Yeong sealed the vial. Ji-Yeong paused, the plastic tube cold in his hand. He thought of the envelope Tina had pressed into his palm, the one he was almost too afraid to open. "I'm going to find out who you are," Ji-Yeong replied, his voice gruff. "And then I'm going to find out why your mother thinks a man like me is your only hope." He turned away to label the sample, but his eyes drifted to the rain-streaked window. Somewhere out there, Tina was running. Ji-Yeong called Mrs. Kang at 6 in the morning. She arrived within the hour, her silver hair pulled back in the same severe bun she'd worn for 40 years. Mrs. Kang was the only person Ji-Yeong trusted. "Take these samples to Dr. Lee. Tell him he has 72 hours, he told her, handing over the DNA samples. Mrs. Kang looked at Willie, then back at Ji-Yeong. Her expression revealed nothing, but her eyes held questions she was too professional to ask. "I'll bring the results to you when it's ready," she said quietly. Ji-Yeong could have sent the boy away. Instead, he chose to wait for the truth. "Do you believe blood makes a family, or the choices we make?" After Mrs. Tang left, Ji-Yeong stood in the doorway of the spare bedroom, watching Willie arrange his few belongings on the dresser. The boy moved with mechanical precision, the stuffed tiger centered exactly, the fake ID placed beside it, a single change of clothes folded with military corners. No child should move like that. No 5-year-old should be so comfortable with silence, so practiced at making himself small. Willie had been trained for invisibility. The realization settled in Ji-Young's chest like a stone. When the boy finished, he sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in his lap, waiting, not crying, not asking for his mother, just waiting with the patience of someone who had learned that tears changed nothing. Ji-Yeong retreated to his study and opened the envelope Tina had left. Inside was a single photograph, its edges worn from handling. The image showed a charity gala. He recognized the venue instantly. Seoul, 6 years ago, the ballroom of the Shilla Hotel where the city's elite gathered to pretend their wealth made them virtuous. The woman in the photograph was Tina, younger, radiant in an emerald dress that caught the light. But it was the man beside her who made Ji-Young's breath stop. Ji-Woo, his younger brother, dead 5 years now in a car accident that had closed the last chapter of the Bang family story. Or so Ji-Yeong had believed. He turned the photograph over with trembling hands. Tina's handwriting, careful and grateful. "Thank you for everything." The pieces shifted, rearranged themselves into a pattern that made his chest tighten. If Willie was Ji-Woo's son, then this boy, this quiet, broken child sleeping in the next room, was the last living blood of his family, the final thread connecting Ji-Yeong to brothers and sisters scattered by time and choices he could never unmake. But why had Tina lied? Why claim the boy was his instead of Ji-Woo's? And why now, after 5 years of silence, had she appeared at his door like a ghost carrying the weight of debts he didn't know he owed? The sound of small footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Willie stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light, his tiger clutched against his chest. "Can I call you Daddy?" the boy asked softly. "Mommy said I could." Ji-Young's throat tightened. He looked at this child who carried his brother's blood. He nodded once. Willie's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, a small light in a darkness Ji-Yeong recognized because he had lived in it for 30 years. "Okay, Daddy," Willie whispered, and padded back to bed. Ji-Yeong sat alone in the study, holding a photograph of his dead brother and a woman who had vanished into the rain, realizing that the next 72 hours would either give him back the family he'd lost or confirm that he'd destroyed it beyond all redemption.
Ji-Yeong made 3 calls before dawn. By sunrise, his network had begun the search for Tina Cross, a woman who, according to every database his people accessed, had ceased to exist the moment she left Willie at his door. No credit cards, no phone records, no digital footprint of any kind. She was a ghost by choice, and ghosts only disappeared when they were running from something that could kill them. The answer came from an unlikely source, a federal prosecutor Ji-Yeong had helped years ago, back when favors still meant something in this city. The man's voice was careful over the encrypted line. Tina Cross has been cooperating with us for 2 years, he said quietly. Financial crimes. She witnessed things while working as a State Department translator, corruption at levels that would make your operation look like a lemonade stand. She's building a case that could bring down senators, foreign officials, people who don't lose gracefully. Ji-Yeong's hand tightened on the phone. And she's terrified. Wouldn't you be? Ji-Yeong asked. The call ended and Ji-Yeong sat in the gray morning light, understanding Tina's situation. Tina hadn't come to him begging for help. She'd come because he was the only person in Los Angeles powerful enough, dangerous enough to protect Willie while she finished what she'd started. She'd made herself vulnerable, lied about the boy's parentage, left her son with a someone she's never met before to ensure his safety. It was the kind of sacrifice that reminded Ji-Yeong of people he'd spent 30 years trying to forget. He pulled up the photograph again, steadying Ji-Woo's face beside Tina's. 6 years ago, Seoul. His brother had been living between 2 countries then, distancing himself from the Bang name after their sister's disgrace. But there was something in the way Ji-Woo looked at Tina in the photograph, protective, familial. Not a lover, but like a guardian. Ji-Yeong's phone buzzed with a message containing records from 6 years earlier. Ji-Woo's travel history showed repeated trips to a small city in Maryland, the same city where Tina had lived, where, according to property records, someone named Hannah Cross had died 3 years ago. Hannah, Ji-Yeong's estranged sister. He hadn't mentioned that name in 30 years. His sister's name hit him like a fist to the chest. The truth hit him all at once. Ji-Woo had found their sister, had visited her in secret, had become the family connection Ji-Yeong had severed 30 years ago when he chose power over the sister who begged him to leave with her. And Tina was connected to Hannah somehow, which meant Willie was too. But what exactly was the connection? Ji-Yeong couldn't wait for the test result to be ready. At breakfast, Willie sat across from him, eating toast. The boy studied Ji-Yeong. "Are you a bad man?" Ji-Yeong set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Why do you ask?" Willie shrugged, a gesture far too world-weary for a 5-year-old. "Nothing. Mommy said bad men can still be good daddies." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and knowing. Ji-Yeong looked at this boy who had been taught to survive in a world that devoured the innocent, who had been handed to a stranger with nothing but his mother's desperate hope that monsters could sometimes choose to protect instead of destroy. "Your mother is a wise woman," Ji-Yeong said quietly. Willie nodded and returned to his toast. Ji-Yeong stood and walked to the window, looking out over a city that had given him everything except the one thing he'd thrown away. Family. And now that family had returned in the form of a child who asked questions Ji-Yeong had spent 30 years refusing to answer. Ji-Yeong pressed his palm against the cold glass and wondered if she was right. 72 hours passed like a held breath. Mrs. Kang delivered the envelope at precisely 6 p.m., her face revealing nothing. Ji-Yeong waited until she left before opening it, the silence of the penthouse pressing against his ears like water. The first line told him what he'd half expected. Willie was not Ji-Woo's biological son. The second line shattered everything he thought he understood. Secondary DNA match, 15% genetic overlap. Relationship, grand uncle. Ji-Yeong's hands trembled as he read the analysis. Willie shared his blood, but not through Ji-Woo. The percentage was precise, damning. Willie was his sister's grandson, Hannah's grandson. The name he hadn't spoken aloud in 30 years now burned through him like acid. He did the math with the cold precision that had built his empire. Willie was 5. Hannah would have had a son, Willie's father, who would now be in his 30s. The timeline aligned with terrible clarity. 30 years ago, Hannah was 23 when their father disowned her for loving a Black American jazz musician. She stood in the family home, pregnant and defiant, begging 17-year-old Ji-Yeong to leave her with her. He'd chosen his father. chosen power, chosen to let his sister disappear into America alone, carrying a child who would grow up to father Willie. And now that child was gone, dead, according to the property records that listed Tina as a widow. Hannah herself had died 3 years ago, alone in Maryland with no Bang family representatives at her funeral because none of them had known she existed. 30 years is a long time to carry regret. If someone you loved walked away long ago, would you still open the door if they returned? Tell me in the comments. Ji-Yeong had built everything on blood loyalty, on the sacred bond of family, yet he'd abandoned the one person who'd actually loved him before he became powerful enough to command fear. Willie was the consequence of that choice, the living proof that 30 years of silence had consequences that echoed through generations. The study door creaked. Willie stood there in his borrowed pajamas, the stuffed tiger dragging on the floor. "Do you want to be my daddy, or do you have to?" The boy asked with devastating simplicity. Ji-Yeong stared at this child who carried Hannah's blood, who embodied every failure Ji-Yeong had spent 30 decades trying to bury beneath power and money and the illusion of control. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. "Go to bed," Ji-Yeong said, finally, his voice rough. Willie nodded and turned away, and Ji-Yeong watched him go, thinking about the sister who'd begged him to choose love over power, and wondering if 30 years was too long to learn the lesson she'd tried to teach him. Ji-Yeong received a call at midnight, 3 days after the DNA results arrived. His contact in the federal prosecutor's office spoke in the clipped tones of a man delivering bad news he'd rather not know. They found her. The people Tina's testifying against, they know where she is. Ji-Yeong's grip tightened on the phone. Who are they? Businessmen, foreign officials, the kind who hide behind legitimate enterprises and political connections. Not your usual street criminals, Mr. Bang. These are people who destroy lives with paperwork and offshore accounts. A pause. They're pressuring her to recant. If she doesn't, they'll burn her credibility to the ground, frame her for crimes she didn't commit, make sure she loses everything, including custody of her son. The line went dead. Ji-Yeong stood at the window, watching the city lights blur in the distance. This wasn't about violence. It was about leverage, the kind of power that came from knowing exactly which pressure points would make someone break. Tina had known this was coming. That's why she'd left Willie with him. A sound behind him made Ji-Yeong turn. Willie stood in the doorway, his small frame trembling. Tears streaked his face, the first Ji-Yeong had seen in 5 days. "Willie," Ji-Yeong moved toward him instinctively. "Mommy said if the bad men come, I have to hide," Willie spoke, his voice breaking. "She said you'd know what to do." The boy's hands fumbled with his stuffed tiger, and suddenly he was pulling something from a seam in the fabric, a small USB drive, warm from being hidden against Willie's chest all this time. Ji-Yeong knelt, taking the drive with careful fingers. "What is this?" "Mommy's insurance," Willie said, using words too adult for his age. "She said it's proof, that it shows everything the bad men did." Ji-Yeong plugged the drive into his laptop with hands that had steadied from years of maintaining control in impossible situations. The files opened: financial records, wire transfers, correspondence between officials and foreign nationals, evidence of fraud, bribery, corruption at levels that would topple careers and destroy dynasties. Tina had been gathering this for 2 years, building a case brick by brick, while knowing that every piece of evidence put her son in greater danger. Willie climbed into the chair beside him, his small presence a reminder of what was at stake. "Can you save Mommy?" Willie asked quietly. Ji-Yeong stared at the screen, calculating. He could use his influence, his connections to protect Tina, help her finish what she'd started. But doing so would expose some of his own questionable business dealings, partnerships with men who wouldn't appreciate Ji-Yeong choosing justice over mutual silence. He could lose everything he'd built: the empire, the respect, the carefully constructed distance from the violence his father had embodied. Or he could stay neutral, let Tina face this alone. Protect Willie, certainly. The boy was family now, whether Ji-Yeong had chosen it or not, but leave Tina to the wolves she deliberately provoked. Willie's hand found his, small fingers, trusting despite everything. "She's my mommy. Please, Daddy, save her," Willie pleaded. Ji-Yeong looked down at this child who carried Hana's blood and her courage, the sister who'd once begged Ji-Yeong to choose love over power and been abandoned for it. He'd made that choice 30 years ago, let Hana walk away alone because protecting her would have cost him his father's approval, his place in the family empire, his future. Now that choice has returned, wrapped in a different face but asking the same question. What matters more, power or the people you trust to protect them? Ji-Yeong closed his eyes and saw Hana at 23, pregnant and defiant, asking 17-year-old Ji-Yeong to be brave. He'd failed her then. "Yes," he heard himself say, "I can save her." Willie leaned against him, and Ji-Yeong felt the weight of redemption settle onto shoulders that had carried everything except the one burden that actually mattered.
The memory came to Ji-Yeong unbidden, triggered by the scent of Willie's shampoo, something floral and innocent that reminded him of another time. He was 7 years old at the time, hiding in the music room while his father's voice thundered through the house. Hana was 13 then, all grace and defiance, pulling him onto the piano bench beside her. "Listen to the music, not the shouting," she'd whispered, her fingers dancing across the keys. "The piano is louder than anger if you let it be." She'd taught him Chopin that summer, protected him from their father's cruelty by making herself the target, drawing the old man's fury like lightning to a rod. The night she left, Ji-Yeong was 17. Hana was 23, pregnant, her face streaked with tears as she stood in the doorway with a single suitcase. "Come with me," she'd begged. "We'll start over, just you and me and the baby." He'd looked at his father's empire spread before him like a kingdom, and he'd chosen power over love. Let her walk away alone into a country that would never fully accept her, carrying a child his family would never acknowledge. That choice had haunted him for 30 years. Mrs. King found him at dawn, staring at the piano he hadn't touched since Hana left. The old woman's face was carved with the wisdom of someone who'd watched the Bang family destroy itself from the inside. "You know who that boy is, Ji-Yeong, Hana's grandson." The words tasted like ash. "That boy is your second chance, Ji-Yeong," Mrs. Kang said, her voice sharp with the authority of someone who'd known him since childhood. "Don't waste it on pride." Ji-Young's hands clenched. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what he needs." "You knew how to survive your father. You knew how to run this empire." Mrs. Kang's eyes held no sympathy, only truth. "Being a father is easier than both. You just have to choose it. And if I fail, then you'll be exactly what you've always been, a man who let fear make his choices for him." She left him alone with those words and the ghost of piano music that still echoed in corners he'd tried to forget. That night, Willie's scream woke Ji-Yeong from restless sleep. He found the boy tangled in sheets, calling for Tina with a desperation that fractured something in Ji-Young's chest. "Willie," he sat on the edge of the bed, awkward and uncertain. "It's all right. You're safe." Willie's eyes opened, wild with terror, before focusing on Ji-Young's face. Then the boy launched himself forward, small arms wrapping around Ji-Young's neck with a fierceness that stole his breath. He held him, this child, who was Hana's legacy and his redemption, feeling the rapid beat of Willie's heart against his chest. "You smell like Grandma Hana's house," Willie whispered into his shoulder. Ji-Young's breath caught. "Tell me about her." Willie nodded. "She died when I was 3. She used to sing to me in Korean." The words hit like bullets. Hana had died 3 years ago, alone except for Tina and Willie. No Bang family at her bedside, no brother to hold her hand as she left this world, just a granddaughter-in-law and a small boy who barely remembered her voice.
"What did she sing?" he asked, his voice rough. Willie hummed a melody, halting, imperfect, but unmistakable, the lullaby Hana had sung to Ji-Yeong when he was small, before their father's cruelty had taught them both that love was weakness. He closed his eyes and let the music wash over him, this bridge across 30 years of silence, carried in the voice of a child who'd never known the woman who had once saved Ji-Young's soul. "I'm going to help your mother," he said quietly, "not because I have to, but because you deserve her, and because Hana would have done the same for me." Willie pulled back, studying Ji-Young's face. "Grandma Hana said family is the people who choose to love you, not the people who have to." The wisdom of a dead woman filtered through a 5-year-old's memory, and Ji-Yeong finally understood what Hana was trying to teach him that night she left. Power was nothing, an empire was dust. The only thing that lasted was the choice to love someone even when it cost you everything. He'd chosen wrong 30 years ago. Ji-Yeong made a call to the federal prosecutors at dawn. The conversation was brief, transactional, the language of men who understood that justice and leverage were often the same currency. "I can guarantee Tina Cross's safety and cooperation," he said carefully. "In exchange, I need immunity for certain financial irregularities in my own operations. Nothing violent, just the gray areas where business and legality blur." The prosecutor was silent for a long moment. "You're gambling your entire operation on this woman." "Yes," Ji-Yeong said simply. The deal was struck by noon. The second meeting happened in a downtown restaurant, neutral territory, witnesses everywhere. The men who'd been pressuring Tina sat across from Ji-Yeong, their expensive suits and manicured hands marking them as the kind of criminals who never got their hands dirty. Ji-Yeong didn't threaten them. Threats were for amateurs. "Tina Cross is under my protection now," he said quietly, placing Willie's USB drive on the table between them. "Everything she knows, I know. Every transaction, every name, every bank account. If anything happens to her, an accident, a fabricated charge, even an unfortunate coincidence, all of this goes to federal investigators who are very interested in your business practices." One of the men leaned forward. "You're making enemies you can't afford, Bang." "I've been making enemies since I was 17 years old. The difference is, I'm choosing which battles matter now." They left understanding that Tina Cross had become untouchable, not through violence, but through the kind of leverage that destroyed empires quietly from the inside. 3 days later, Tina returned to the penthouse. She stood in the doorway, exhausted and shaken, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights and the weight of testimony that would reshape powerful lives. She looked at Ji-Yeong across the room, and no words passed between them at first. Just understanding. Just the recognition of two people who'd both gambled everything on different versions of justice. "You didn't have to do this," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Ji-Yeong replied. "I did." Then Willie saw her. The boy's scream of joy shattered the careful distance Ji-Yeong had been maintaining. Willie launched himself across the room, and Tina dropped to her knees, catching him, holding him like she'd never let go. Her shoulders shook with sobs she'd been holding back for weeks. Ji-Yeong watched from across the room this reunion he'd made possible by choosing, finally after 30 years, to protect instead of abandon. This was what family looked like. Not the cold empire his father had built, not the power that demanded loyalty through fear. Just a mother and child reunited because someone had chosen to be brave when it mattered. Tina looked up at him over Willie's head, tears streaming down her face, and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Ji-Yeong nodded once, feeling something shift in his chest, something that had been frozen since the night Hana walked away and he'd let her go. For the first time in 30 decades, Bang Ji-Yeong understood what his sister had been trying to tell him. Power meant nothing if you had no one to protect. After Willie fell asleep, Tina sat across from Ji-Yeong in the penthouse's quiet living room. The city lights blurred beyond the windows, and the silence between them held the weight of secrets that couldn't remain buried any longer. "I need to tell you the truth," Tina said softly. "All of it." Ji-Yeong waited, his hands folded in his lap with the patience he'd learned from decades of listening to confessions. "I am Hana's daughter-in-law," Tina began, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "My husband, Willie's father, was her son. He died 2 years ago, from an illness. Hana died 3 years before that. She died of cancer. She was alone at the end, estranged from everyone except us." The words landed like stones in deep water. Ji-Yeong's sister had died surrounded by strangers. No, not strangers, surrounded by the family she'd built after the Bangs had cast her out. "She talked about you," Tina continued. "Even at the end, when the morphine made everything blur, she'd call your name. She forgave you, Ji-Yeong. I don't know if that matters now, but she did." Ji-Yeong's throat tightened. What were her last words? "If you're ever in trouble, find Ji-Yeong. He'll hate that he cares, but he will help you." Tina smiled through her tears. She knew you better than you knew yourself. The truth of it cut deeper than any blade. Hana had understood what Ji-Yeong had spent 30 years denying, that beneath the power and control, he was still the 7-year-old boy she'd protected, the brother who'd needed her to teach him that love could be louder than anger. "When I witnessed those financial crimes," Tina said, "I knew I had to testify, but doing so meant putting Willie at risk. I had nowhere else to turn." She met his eyes. "I lied to you. I let you think Willie might be yours because I was desperate. I knew you'd protect your own blood, but I didn't know if you'd protect us, your sister's leftovers." Her voice broke on the last word, and Ji-Yeong saw the shame she'd been carrying, the belief that she and Willie were somehow less worthy of protection because they came from the sister the Bang family erased. "I'm sorry," Tina whispered, "for the lie, for bringing this to your door, for everything." Ji-Yeong stood and walked to the window, staring at his reflection in the glass. He'd never reconciled with Hana, never met his nephew, Tina's husband, never knew Willie existed until a desperate woman brought the boy to his door in the rain. He'd been a ghost to his own blood for 30 years, and now this woman who owed him nothing, who had every reason to hate the family that had abandoned Hana, was apologizing for trying to survive. "Hana would have lied, stolen, and burned the world down for her child," Ji-Yeong said quietly, still facing the window. "You did what you had to do. Don't apologize for being her daughter-in-law." He turned to face Tina and saw understanding bloom in her eyes, the recognition that he wasn't just talking about her, but about the sister who'd chosen love over family approval and paid the price for that courage. "Do you want us to disappear again?" Tina asked carefully. "I can do that. Willie and I were good at being invisible." Ji-Yeong looked toward the closed door where Willie slept, this child who carried Hana's blood and her fierce spirit, who asked if Ji-Yeong wanted to be his daddy or if he had to be. 30 years ago, he'd let Hana walk away because he'd been too afraid to choose love over power. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. "No," Ji-Yeong said firmly, "your family. That means you stay with me." Tina's breath caught, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, not from grief this time, but from relief so profound it reshaped her entire face. "Hana was right about you," she whispered. Ji-Yeong nodded slowly, feeling the weight of 30 years of regret finally begin to lift. She usually was.
2 months passed like the slow healing of an old wound. The corruption case concluded with headlines that would reshape careers. Tina's testimony had been instrumental, her courage validated by federal prosecutors who ensured her safety remained guaranteed. With Ji-Yeong's protection and legal support, she'd emerged from the trial intact, scarred perhaps, but whole. She and Willie now lived in a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, its mortgage paid in full by Ji-Yeong as part of the family trust he'd established for Willie. The house was warm with photographs and laughter, everything Hana's home must have been before illness stole her voice. Ji-Yeong visited twice a week,
Tuesdays for dinner, Saturdays for piano lessons, Hana's gift, passed down through generations. He taught Willie Korean phrases, the same ones Hana had taught him when the world felt too large and frightening. Willie called him Uncle Ji now, at Tina's gentle insistence, because honesty mattered more than convenient fictions. Tina had returned to work as a translator, rebuilding her life with the quiet dignity of someone who understood that survival was its own kind of victory. One evening, after Willie had fallen asleep, Tina made tea in the small kitchen. They sat across from each other at the dining table, and the silence between them was comfortable now, no longer weighted with secrets or survival, just the easy quiet of people who'd earned each other's trust. "Why are you really taking care of us?" Tina asked softly, cradling her cup between her hands. Ji-Yeong considered the question, then answered with the honesty she deserved. "Because I failed her. I won't fail you or him." Tina's eyes glistened in the lamplight. "You didn't fail her. She talked about you until the very end. Even when she could barely speak, your name was on her lips. She forgave you." Tina reached across the table, her hand covering his. "She just wanted you to forgive yourself." The words settled into the hollow places Ji-Yeong had carried for 30 years, and he realized that forgiveness, true forgiveness, wasn't something you earned. It was something you accepted, even when you believed you didn't deserve it. Willie's 6th birthday arrived on a Saturday, bright with autumn sunshine. The party was small, Mrs. Kang, a few trusted friends, and Willie's classmates running through the backyard with the wild abandon of children who'd never learned to be afraid. On the mantel sat a photograph of Hana, young and radiant, surrounded with fresh flowers that Tina replaced every week. Willie stood before his cake, 6 candles flickering in the gentle breeze from the open window. He closed his eyes, made his wish, and blew them out with a breath that spoke of hope rather than desperation. Then he turned to Ji-Yeong, his dark eyes bright. "Uncle Ji, will you play Grandma Hana's song?" Ji-Yeong felt every gaze in the room turn toward him. The piano sat in the corner, purchased by Tina specifically for these lessons, its keys gleaming with possibility. He hadn't played in 30 years, not since Hana left and he'd closed the lid on that part of himself, believing that music was a weakness he couldn't afford to bear. But Willie was watching him with Hana's eyes, and Tina was nodding encouragement, and Mrs. Kang's expression held the challenge that had driven him to finally choose courage over fear. Ji-Yeong crossed to the piano and sat down. His fingers found the keys, stiff at first, uncertain. Then muscle memory took over, and the lullaby emerged, Hana's song, the one she'd played for him when he was small and the world felt too cruel to bear. The notes filled the room like light through stained glass, beautiful and fractured and perfect in their imperfection. Willie leaned against Tina, content, his small hand resting on her knee. Across the room, Tina's eyes met Ji-Yeong's, and she mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Ji-Yeong played on, and for the first time in 30 decades, the Bong family was whole again, not through blood alone, not through power or obligation, but through the choice to love despite the cost. Hana had tried to teach him that lesson when he was 17. It had taken 30 years and a 5-year-old boy to finally understand what she meant. Family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you chose every day in the small acts of showing up and staying present. The music swelled and fell, and Ji-Yeong closed his eyes, feeling Hana's presence in the room, not as a ghost, but as a legacy. She lived in Willie's laughter, in Tina's courage, in the choice that Ji-Yeong had finally made to be the man his sister had always believed he could become. When the last note faded, Willie clapped with pure joy, and the sound was louder than any empire Ji-Yeong had ever built. This small moment of connection and grace was what power had never been able to give him. This was what choosing love looked like. And it was enough. Some stories don't end when the music fades. They stay with us because they remind us of choices we made and choices we still can.
If this story stirred a memory, a regret, or a second chance you never expected, please tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you believe, like Ji-Yeong finally did, that it's never too late to choose love, please like this story and subscribe. You help this channel reach others who still believe in quiet strength, forgiveness, and family.